I never thought betrayal would come from the two people I trusted most in this world. I had always believed in loyalty, in the unshakable bonds of love and friendship. Julia was my wife, the woman I had built a life with, and Ryan had been my best friend since college, the man I once called my brother. If someone had told me years ago that these two would be the ones to shatter my world, I would have laughed. But life has a cruel way of revealing truths we never want to see. Hello, I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy our stories. Thank you for your continuous trust. Your support means a lot to us and keeps fueling us to bring you more stories. If you haven't subscribed yet to our channel, please support us by clicking on the subscribe button. Now let's get into our story. I was a self-made man. Nothing had been handed to me. I built my company from the ground up, poured sweat and sleepless nights into every deal, every late-night meeting, every sacrifice. Julia had been with me through much of it. She had seen the long hours, the stress, the moments of doubt. I thought she understood what it meant to build something lasting. Ryan, on the other hand, had always been the charismatic one. He could walk into a room and command attention effortlessly. While I was behind the scenes making things happen, he was the face people gravitated toward. He had charm, I had strategy. Together, we had been a force to be reckoned with, or so I thought. I had given him a high-ranking position in my company, not because he was the most qualified, but because I trusted him. But trust is a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. I can't say I didn't notice the signs, but I ignored them. I suppose love makes fools of us all. Julia had become distant, always distracted. Her phone was suddenly something she guarded closely, turning the screen away when I walked into the room. She had excuses. Dinners with friends that never seemed to include me, late nights that felt suspicious, an emotional distance that had grown so thick, it was suffocating. And then there was Ryan. At first, I didn't want to believe that my best friend could be involved. But things didn't add up. He had started dressing differently. Designer suits, expensive watches, the kind of lifestyle that I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. He never discussed business with me anymore, always brushing off conversations about money with a smug grin, as if he knew something I didn't. Then one evening, the truth crashed into me like a freight train. It was a Friday night. Julia had claimed she was out with her girlfriends, and Ryan had said he was away on business. But something in my gut told me otherwise. I had never been the jealous or controlling type, but that night, something in me snapped. I needed to know. I drove to a high-end restaurant downtown, one I knew Julia loved but had recently claimed was too expensive when I suggested a date night. I walked in, my pulse hammering against my ribs, and there they were. Sitting at a dimly lit corner table, Julia and Ryan leaned in close, their laughter like nails scraping against my soul. Her hand rested on his, and in that moment, I realized I had been living in a lie. I should have confronted them right there. I should have flipped the table, shouted, demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked out, my entire world collapsing around me. 2 days later, Julia packed her bags. She didn't offer much of an explanation, just the usual cliches. We've grown apart. I don't love you the way I used to. Ryan and I, we just happened. As if love was something that just happened, like an accident, instead of a deliberate choice. She didn't apologize. She didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked relieved. And Ryan? He didn't even have the decency to face me. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved into a penthouse with Julia the following week, as if discarding me was the final step in his grand plan. For weeks, I was numb. I went through the motions of work, of life. But inside, something had shattered. People at the office whispered. Friends tiptoed around me, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let the pain consume me. And that's when I made a decision. I would not be the broken man they expected me to be. I would not be the fool who begged for explanations or revenge in the way they anticipated. Instead, I would do what I did best. I would strategize. Julia thought Ryan was richer than me. That was her fatal mistake. She never realized that the money Ryan flaunted came from the very company I owned, that the power he held was power I had given him. He was nothing without me. So, I stepped back, silently, watching, waiting. I poured my energy into my business, expanding, growing, making connections that would ensure I was untouchable. I cut off old ties, distancing myself from people who had chosen their side. I stopped being the man who gave without question, and I waited for the perfect moment to take back everything they had stolen from me. It took 5 years. 5 years of silence, patience, and watching from the shadows. Then, one day, an invitation arrived. It was for their wedding anniversary. 5 years of bliss, of stolen happiness, of a life built on lies. And I knew, this was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Betrayal has a way of changing a man. Some let it destroy them, leaving them bitter and broken, unable to move forward. But me? I let it refine me. Pain is a powerful motivator, and I used every ounce of it to forge something unshakable, something that neither Ryan nor Julia could ever take from me again. After Julia walked out of our home and straight into Ryan's arms, I didn't waste time mourning. I buried myself in my work. If I had once been a dedicated businessman, now I became an unstoppable force. I worked harder, thought smarter, moved faster. I expanded my company in ways that even I hadn't imagined before. I made connections with the right people, powerful investors, international clients, and business magnates who saw potential in my vision. Every dollar I made, I reinvested. Every partnership I formed was calculated. I wanted to ensure that no one, not Julia, not Ryan, not even fate itself, could ever put me in a vulnerable position again. And all the while, Ryan sat comfortably in the position I had given him, unaware that the very foundation beneath his feet was shifting. Ryan had always been reckless with money. He loved the appearance of wealth more than actual wealth itself. And now, with Julia by his side, that trait had only worsened. He was spending more than he was earning, hosting lavish parties, upgrading from penthouses to mansions, and collecting expensive watches and cars like they were souvenirs. I watched it all unfold with silent amusement. You see, Ryan had no idea that while my company had grown exponentially, his own standing within it had remained stagnant. He had a title, yes, but no real authority. I had strategically shifted key decision-making powers away from him, rerouting deals, signing contracts in my own name, and ensuring that when the time came, he would be completely disposable. The only reason I hadn't fired him yet was because I needed him exactly where he was. Arrogant, comfortable, unaware. While Ryan continued his illusion of grandeur, Julia was beginning to see the truth, or at least, the parts of it that mattered to her. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship wasn't the fairy tale she had imagined. Their spending habits were unsustainable, and Ryan was making promises he couldn't keep. Julia had always been drawn to stability, to security, and I knew that was what had led her to Ryan in the first place. She had mistaken his arrogance for success, his flashy lifestyle for real wealth. But now, with the cracks forming, she was starting to understand something important. Money wasn't infinite. There was a moment, a particular moment, that told me things weren't as perfect as they pretended. One evening, I attended a high-profile charity gala. It was the kind of event where the elite gathered, where names and reputations mattered. I hadn't planned on interacting with Ryan or Julia that night, but fate had other plans. I spotted them across the room. Ryan, dressed in a suit that was just a little too flashy, a little too desperate. Julia, in an elegant gown, but with eyes that no longer held the same spark of confidence. They had arrived in style, of course, making sure everyone noticed them. But there was something off. Julia's smile was forced, her laughter hollow. And Ryan? He looked tense, constantly checking his phone, shaking hands with people who didn't seem to respect him the way they once did. Then it happened. A waiter passed by with champagne, and Ryan reached for a glass, only to pause, hesitate, and ultimately decline. That was unlike him. Ryan never passed up an opportunity to indulge. But I knew what that meant. They were struggling. He was running out of money. I took a slow sip of my own drink, watching them as a hunter watches his prey. Over the next few months, things became clearer. I made sure Ryan's role in my company became less relevant. He had no idea that his decisions were being overridden, that his influence was shrinking. He still walked around with the air of a powerful man, but the truth was, he was little more than an employee waiting to be dismissed. Julia, on the other hand, started appearing at events alone. Rumors swirled. Some said she and Ryan were fighting about money. Others whispered that Julia had started reconnecting with certain wealthy acquaintances, possibly seeking new opportunities. It was classic Julia. When the ship started sinking, she looked for another one to board. And all this time, I did nothing. I never confronted them, never revealed what I knew. I let them dig their own graves, their arrogance and greed leading them further into the abyss. Because I wasn't just planning revenge, I was planning justice. The opportunity came in the form of an invitation, an engraved, elegant card announcing Ryan and Julia's 5-year wedding anniversary, a celebration of their betrayal. They sent me an invitation as if I were some old acquaintance, some distant part of their past they could now afford to acknowledge. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, feeling the weight of it. They wanted to show the world they had won. What they didn't know was that I had already written the final chapter of their story. This wasn't their celebration. It was their reckoning, and I would make sure they never forgot it. Some betrayals fade with time. People move on, find new beginnings, let wounds heal. But not this one. Not what Julia and Ryan did to me. Their betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment. No, it was calculated, deliberate, a knife buried deep in my back, twisted for good measure. And now, after 5 years, they had the audacity to send me an invitation to their anniversary. I remember the moment I saw it, the thick, ivory-colored envelope lying on my desk like a smug little messenger of their arrogance. My assistant had placed it there along with my other correspondence, unaware of the storm it was about to unleash in my mind. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The envelope was expensive, embossed with gold lettering. Julia and Ryan's 5th anniversary celebration. I opened it slowly, scanning the details. A grand ballroom, fine dining, a night of celebration and success. Success. That word made me laugh. It was so them, so arrogant, so desperate to flaunt a life they barely had a grip on. Ryan and Julia had built their world on illusion, and they wanted me to witness it firsthand. They thought they had one. What they didn't know was that I had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. I picked up my pen, scrawled my RSVP, and sent it back the same day. If they wanted me there, I would come. But I wouldn't come as the man they betrayed. I would come as the man they should have feared. Revenge isn't something you rush. It's something you craft, piece by piece, with precision and patience. And I had perfected the art. For 5 years, I had expanded my empire, strengthened my power, and built connections they didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, Ryan and Julia had been living in a world of excess, oblivious to the fact that their foundation was cracking beneath them. I made sure of it. Ryan still held a senior position in my company, but I had stripped him of any real influence. He had no idea that every major deal he thought he was closing was actually controlled by me. He had no clue that his lavish salary came from accounts I could freeze with a single call. Julia, on the other hand, had started noticing. I had heard the whispers, how their wealth was no longer as endless as she once believed, how their expenses were climbing higher than their income. And now, they had invited me into their home, thinking they could parade their so-called success in front of me. I smiled at the thought. They have no idea what's coming. I went over every detail, ensuring my entrance would be unforgettable. My suit, handcrafted, custom-fitted, a subtle display of power. My demeanor, calm, confident, unreadable. And in my pocket, the final touch, Ryan's termination letter. It wasn't just any termination letter. It was written in elegant prose, detailing his removal from his position with immediate effect. No severance, no security, nothing. By the time I was done, Ryan wouldn't just lose his job, he would lose the very lifestyle he had built on my name. I could already imagine the look on his face. The sheer disbelief. Julia's horror as she realized that the stability she had traded me for had been an illusion all along. I would not just attend their anniversary. I would end it. The night of the celebration arrived, and I walked into that ballroom like I owned it. Because, in a way, I did. Every step I took was measured, every movement controlled. I had spent years mastering this moment, the art of walking into a room and commanding it without saying a word. I could feel the shift in energy as I entered. Eyes turned. Conversations slowed. And then I saw them, Ryan and Julia, standing at the center of it all, laughing, smiling, basking in their carefully crafted fantasy. Ryan spotted me first. I saw his confidence flicker for the briefest moment before he forced a grin. He nudged Julia, and when she turned to see me, her smile faltered. She hadn't expected me to come. They had invited me to gloat, but they hadn't actually expected me to show up. I walked toward them, slow and deliberate. Ryan recovered quickly, extending his hand. "Ethan, you made it." His voice was loud, overly cheerful. An act. I shook his hand, my grip firm. "Of course, Ryan. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Julia was watching me carefully, her eyes scanning my suit, my presence, my unshaken confidence. I knew what she was thinking. I looked better than the last time she saw me. More refined, more powerful. I could practically hear her thoughts. "This isn't the same man I left." "No, Julia, it isn't." For the next hour, I played the part perfectly. I mingled, I smiled, I engaged in polite conversation. I let them think they were still in control, still in power. But I was watching as Julia's eyes darted toward me when she thought I wasn't looking. Watching as Ryan tried too hard to impress people who didn't respect him. Watching as they both tried to mask their unease at my presence. Then, the moment came. A waiter walked past, offering me a glass of champagne. I took it, turning my attention to the front of the room where Ryan stood, tapping his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, beaming, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 5 years of love, success, and happiness." I took a slow sip of my champagne. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The moment they thought would mark their victory. I smiled, because in a few minutes, they would realize this wasn't their victory at all. This was the beginning of their downfall. The party was as extravagant as I had expected. No expense spared. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over elegantly dressed guests. Champagne flowed endlessly, and a string quartet played softly in the background. It was the kind of event designed not for celebration, but for spectacle. Ryan and Julia wanted to put on a show, to convince the world that their life together was perfect, untouchable. But perfection is a fragile thing. And tonight, I was going to shatter it. From across the room, I observed Ryan and Julia. They were the perfect hosts, smiling, laughing, clinking glasses with their guests. But I could see through the act. Julia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her laughter came a second too late, forced rather than natural. She kept stealing glances at me, her expression unreadable, but I knew what was behind it. Regret. Ryan, on the other hand, was trying too hard. He moved through the crowd with exaggerated confidence, speaking louder than necessary, making grand gestures as if he needed to remind everyone that this was his night, that he was still in control. But cracks were beginning to show. Whispers moved through the room like an undercurrent. "Did you hear? Ethan Carter's company expanded overseas last year. His net worth tripled. I heard he owns stakes in several Fortune 500 companies now. He's practically untouchable." "Isn't Ryan still working under Ethan?" Ryan's posture stiffened every time he caught wind of the murmurs. He smiled tightly, pretending not to hear, but I saw his fingers clench around his champagne glass. He had spent years convincing himself that he had one, that taking Julia from me had somehow made him superior. But deep down, he was beginning to realize the truth. I was the one who had come out on top. Julia approached me before she could stop herself. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth but hesitant. You really came." I turned to her, meeting her gaze. She was still beautiful. Perhaps even more so now, dressed in a gown designed to turn heads. But beauty is a fleeting thing when burdened by regret. I did, I replied simply, taking a slow sip of my drink. She shifted, glancing at Ryan across the room before lowering her voice. You seem different. I let a small smile touch my lips. 5 years is a long time. She looked at me as though searching for something, some trace of the man she once knew. But I wasn't that man anymore. She hesitated, then shook her head. Never mind. I knew what she wanted to ask. Did I ever think about her? Did I hate her? Did I regret losing her? But the truth was, I felt nothing for her anymore. She had made her choice. And tonight, she would finally see what she had given up. Ryan had been watching our interaction from a distance, his expression tightening. He walked over, slipping an arm around Julia's waist in a possessive gesture. Everything okay here? He asked, his voice just a little too forced. Of course, I said smoothly, tilting my glass toward him. Just catching up? His jaw flexed. Well, Julia and I have been incredibly busy. You know how it is. Success comes with responsibilities. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I know exactly how it is. Something about my tone made him uneasy. I could see it in the way he swallowed, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was starting to suspect, starting to wonder if tonight wasn't going to unfold the way he had planned. A waiter approached the front of the room, tapping a crystal glass with a silver spoon. The toasts were about to begin. Ryan squared his shoulders, regaining his smug confidence. This was his moment, his chance to stand before a room full of people and boast about the life he had stolen. He lifted his glass, stepping into the spotlight with a wide grin. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 5 years of love, success, and happiness. The crowd applauded politely, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Julia stood beside him, smiling dutifully, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She could feel it too. Something was coming. Something neither of them were prepared for. I swirled the champagne in my glass, watching them, waiting for the perfect moment. And then, as Ryan prepared to launch into his self-congratulatory speech, I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the envelope. The time had finally come. There are moments in life when time seems to slow, when every sound, every breath, every flicker of movement becomes impossibly sharp. This was one of those moments. Ryan stood at the front of the room, basking in the glow of his own self-importance, champagne glass raised, lips curled in a smug grin. Julia stood beside him, her posture perfect, her practiced smile frozen in place. They thought they had one. They thought they had everything. I was about to show them just how wrong they were. I stepped forward, my presence alone enough to turn heads. Before Ryan could finish his self-congratulatory toast, I casually plucked a microphone from a nearby stand. The murmurs in the room quieted as all eyes turned to me. I met Ryan's gaze, then Julia's, and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, I said smoothly, lifting my own glass, before we continue celebrating this remarkable occasion, I'd like to say a few words. Ryan let out a short laugh, clearly caught off guard. Oh, well, Ethan, this is a surprise. Of course, go ahead. He tried to play it off, but I could see the nervous flicker in his eyes. He had spent years pretending I was nothing more than a footnote in his story. Now, he was about to find out that I was the author of it. I turned my gaze to the crowd, my voice steady, calm. First, I'd like to thank Ryan and Julia for inviting me tonight. It's been enlightening. I let the words hang in the air. And I must say, I admire their confidence. It takes a special kind of arrogance to send an invitation to the man you betrayed and expect him to simply clap along. A few hushed gasps rippled through the audience. Ryan's expression tightened. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. But, in the spirit of celebration, I continued, I have a little something to share as well. A gift, if you will. Something that should make this anniversary even more unforgettable. Ryan let out a forced chuckle. Oh, what is it? I unfolded the paper inside and held it up. Ryan, I said, my voice slicing through the silence, consider this your official termination letter. The room froze. For a moment, there was only stunned silence, as if the air had been sucked from the room. Ryan blinked. What? I cleared my throat and began reading aloud. Effective immediately, Ryan Caldwell is relieved of his duties as senior executive of Carter Enterprises. He is hereby dismissed from all company privileges, accounts, and assets affiliated with the organization. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Ryan went pale. This has to be some kind of joke? I looked at him, my expression cool. It's not. His breathing turned shallow. He looked around, as if expecting anyone, to laugh, to tell him this was all an elaborate prank. But no one did. Julia stiffened beside him, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, what is this? I met her gaze, and for the first time that evening, I saw real fear in her eyes. You always thought Ryan had more than me, I said simply. That's why you left. That's why you betrayed me. But the truth is, Julia, I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough for only them to hear. Ryan never had anything of his own. He was just borrowing it from me. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I turned my attention back to Ryan, who was shaking his head. This doesn't make sense. I work for the company. You worked for my company, I corrected. The company I built. The one you've been riding on for 5 years, while pretending to be the man you never were. His hands curled into fists. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, I said with a smirk. You see, Ryan, you've been too busy spending money that wasn't yours to realize something important. I own everything. The title, the power, the money. You never had any of it. You were just another employee. The weight of my words hit him like a freight train. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the sheer panic that flashed across his face as the truth finally sank in. He wasn't the king of this castle. He was just a man standing on a foundation he never built, one that I had just ripped out from under him. The guests stood in stunned silence, waiting to see what would happen next. I turned back to the crowd and lifted my glass. So, here's to Ryan and Julia, I said, my voice rich with irony. May their future be just as bright as the illusions they built it on. Then I took a slow sip, letting the moment stretch. Ryan looked like he wanted to explode. Julia looked like she wanted to disappear. Satisfied, I set down my glass and adjusted my cufflinks. And then, without another word, I walked out of the party. Behind me, I could hear the chaos unfolding. The frantic whispers, the sharp intake of Julia's breath, the sound of Ryan's glass slipping from his hand and shattering against the marble floor. It was poetic, really. 5 years ago, they had taken everything from me. And now, in a single night, I had taken it all back. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. As I walked out of the grand hall, leaving behind the wreckage of Ryan and Julia's perfect facade, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 5 years suddenly lifted. Revenge wasn't just about striking back. It was about closure, about reclaiming the power I had once surrendered. Behind me, the party spiraled into chaos. Ryan, still clutching the termination letter, turned to Julia, his face contorted in desperation and fury. "This is your fault," he spat, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the murmuring guests. Julia flinched. "My fault? You're the one who convinced me you were better off than Ethan, that we'd have everything." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "And you were so quick to believe it, weren't you? You left him because you thought I had more, because you thought I was better." Their marriage, the one they had so proudly flaunted, was unraveling in real time. The guests, who had moments ago been raising their glasses in celebration, now exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some whispered behind their hands, others openly watched the train wreck unfold. No one stepped in to help. No one wanted to. Because in the end, everyone loves to witness the fall of those who built their castles on lies. Ryan tore at his tie, his face turning red. This can't be happening. This isn't happening. He turned to one of the board members of my company, a man who had once sung his praises. Tell him he can't do this. Tell him I have rights, the man sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. It's Ethan's company, Ryan. You were just an employee. And judging by your reckless spending, I'd say you weren't a very good one. Ryan's lips parted, but no words came out. I had spent years watching him gloat, acting like he was untouchable. Now, in a matter of minutes, I had taken everything. The realization hit him all at once. His breath came in shallow gasps. His hands trembled. The future he had envisioned, one filled with wealth, power, and social standing, was crumbling like sand slipping through his fingers. And the worst part? I didn't have to destroy him. He had done that all by himself. Julia, once poised and elegant, now looked lost. The color had drained from her face, her carefully crafted mask of confidence slipping. She turned to me then, her eyes pleading. Ethan, I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. We had something once. I know I hurt you, but, she took a shaky step forward. I was wrong. The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate, but they meant nothing. 5 years ago, she had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I loved you, Julia, I said, my voice calm but firm. I would have given you everything, but you didn't want love. You wanted wealth, status, and you thought Ryan could give it to you. She swallowed hard. You made your decision, I interrupted. And tonight, you finally saw the truth. You chose a man who had nothing of his own. And now, you have nothing too. Her breath hitched, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. But regret was just that, too little, too late. I turned without another word, stepping past them, past the stunned guests, past the mess they had made of their own lives. Outside, my car was waiting, the night air crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. For years, I had imagined this moment. I had dreamed of revenge, of the perfect downfall. But standing here now, watching their world collapse, I realized something profound. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won. They had spent 5 years believing they had taken everything from me. But the truth was, they had freed me. Without Julia, I had built a life stronger than I ever imagined. Without Ryan, I had turned my company into an empire. And without the bitterness of betrayal holding me down, I was stepping into a future where they no longer mattered. As I slid into the driver's seat, I cast one last glance at the grand building behind me, a place where illusions had shattered, a place I would never have to return to again. Then, without hesitation, I drove away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.